Hi, this is Roger Moore, and you're listening to James Bond Radio.
Hello, and welcome to James Bond Radio. Today, we are joined by a Oscar-winning legend, special effects man, John Richardson. And I'm also joined by another legend who hasn't won an Oscar yet, but I would say that time may still be to come. It is, of course, Mr. Dan Gale. Say hello, Dan.
Hello, Dan. Hello, Tom.
Now, are you excited to talk to John today?
Well, I am, because he's obviously he's a key figure in what I would consider to be my part of the Bond series, the middle period. That's the bit where I was most into it. That's the bit that I keep going back to, and his thumbprints are all over those films all throughout the 1980s.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just going to reel off this dude's back catalogue, or some of this dude's back catalogue. So, in terms of Bond, we've got Casino Royale 67, we've got Moonraker, we've got Octopussy, A View to a Kill, The Living Daylights, you're going to be happy with that. We've got License to Kill, we've got Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Right? That's Bond, okay? Non-Bond films, there are many, many, many absolute classics, but just kind of glossing over, you've got Lawrence of Arabia, you've got The Dirty Dozen, The Battle of Britain, The Omen, A Bridge Too Far, Superman, Flash Gordon, Aliens, and all the Harry Potter films. Now, those are just some of the ones of note. There are about a million more of note, including Roger Moore, Escape to Athena, and North Sea Hijack, two absolute classics. Love both of those films.
And two more. Go on.
I was going to say 6 Oscar nominations, one of them for Aliens. I mean, good God, man. What a back catalogue is that?
And 2 John Glenn movies that weren't Bond.
Which one of those?
Christopher Columbus, The Discovery, and Ace's Iron Eagle 3, which I saw yesterday for the first time, and it's amazing.
You were texting me throughout, letting me know about key similarities to Bond.
I don't like texting or doing live tweets during a movie. I think that's wrong. You should just let it wash over you. But there were so many bits in that film that made me go, "Oh, clearly that's been influenced by License to Kill. This shot has been influenced by Living Daylights," and all throughout the film there was a load of little plot points that made me go, "Definitely done by John Glenn." It's good fun. I enjoyed it. It's good fun.
Beautiful stuff. Cool. All right then. So should we jump in and see what John's got to tell us today?
Do it.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Bond. James.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Welcome to James Bond Radio. News, reviews, and discussion of all things 007.
Pussy.
As you can see, I have no problem with female authority.
Oh, pipe down, 007.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to lie.
John Richardson, welcome to James Bond Radio. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for asking me on.
No worries. It's a pleasure and an honour to have you on board. We've been pouring through your IMDb page, and it's making our eyes water because you've literally worked some of the most legendary films that have ever been made. So we salute you, my good man.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I've been doing this a long time. I've been privileged to work on some great pictures with some great directors over the years. I worked on, I think, 9 James Bond movies in all. One of those being the Rogue Bond, because the first Casino Royale with 4 James Bonds, which maybe we won't talk about.
Oh, no, we should. We should definitely talk about that, definitely.
Well, we had 7 directors, 4 James Bonds. A lot of people fell by the wayside. But we had some interesting people on it. David Niven, Peter Sellers, Orson Welles, Ursula Andress made a guest appearance. We even had Peter O'Toole on it at one point.
That's right.
I worked with all 7 directors, I think in all of the major film studios in the country at the time. I used to wake up every morning and trying to remember which studio we were at today, and there was no telling whether it'd be Val Guest at MGM, Ken Hughes at Shepperton, or John Huston in Pinewood. So it was an interesting experience.
Absolutely. I reckon there's a book in there about the making of that film, if there isn't already, that I don't know about, because it sounds like utter chaos.
I'm surprised nobody has written a book, or not one that I'm aware of anyway. It was such a bizarre experience, because Peter Sellers came on and he started with Joe McGrath directing, who was a friend. They fell out rather seriously. So Bob Parrish came and took over directing. Orson didn't get on with, Peter Sellers didn't get on with Orson Welles. So they would both go home at night and write their own piece of script. And then they decided that they wouldn't work on the set together. So we had to film everything looking across the back of our table one way on one day and everything looking back the other way the next, so that they came in on alternate days. It was it was pretty crazy. We then had a director called Dick Talmadge. Val Guest set up with another crew at MGM with David Niven. It just went on, and we'd get odd bits of script from time to time. Nobody quite knew what we were doing. They built the casino set in Shepperton to shoot on for, I think, 3 weeks. We shot on it for over a month. They struck it, rebuilt it on another stage, didn't shoot on it, struck it again, then rebuilt it on the silent stage at Shepperton. They unrolled the carpet, which had been in the set all the time, and the third time of unrolling, somebody had cut the shape of their living room out of the middle of the carpet.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So they had to repair the carpet before we could carry on. And then we shot on it for 3 months on the silent stage. It was, I say, just a bizarre experience.
I can imagine a bizarre experience all round, that one, even to watch the film, let alone make it.
Yeah.
This was perhaps down to the lack of experience on the producer's part. Is that what it was?
Well, no. I mean, Charlie Feldman was a very well-known, respected producer, but the whole thing just got sort of out of hand. He wanted to do a crazy Bond film, and he certainly did that. But I think there were too many people with their fingers in the pie, all with different opinions, and nobody really controlling the helm at all. So it just got from bad to worse. And when we ended up with cowboys and Indians parachuting in through the roof of the casino, I think we all sort of gave up and took the money every day.
Absolutely. Cool. So going back to the beginning then, obviously your dad was already in the business. What kind of got you started in the world of special effects? Was it always going to be that because of your dad, or did you have another plan and you just kind of ended up in this world as well?
Well, I grew up from a very young age. I mean, the first memories I've got are going on film sets. So, I'd go to work with Dad one day and be rowed across a huge water tank with all Captain Hornblower's ships sailing across it. The next day I could be out on Chobham Common playing on a Second World War Sherman tank. And, the next day I might be on the back lot at MGM where he's burning down a huge set. So, I've always said if you grow up with a father who's blowing things up and burning things down for a living. What else do you want to do as a kid?
100.
And I used to then go on location with him on films like Exodus, directed by Preminger, and Lawrence of Arabia. And I'd work with him sometimes when I could. So all I wanted to really do was leave school and get into the film business doing effects.
Absolutely.
So your son is also in the business as well, Marcus. Did you feel, was he under any pressure to sort of carry on the legacy, or did you try and fight?
No, I'd let him do whatever he wanted to do. He's still working with me today. So I think in 2 years' time, between the three of us, we've covered 100 years of filmmaking in this country, which is a bit.
That's pretty impressive. And I had a look at looking at the list of the titles between your father's work and Marcus's work. It is just unbelievable. It touches on so many different genres and film companies, and there are classics. There are others that people may not have ever heard of, but I've noticed on each and every one of them, you seem to be credited as something different almost every time. You seem, sometimes you're visual effects, sometimes you're special effects, sometimes you're the coordinator, the supervisor, the designer. Is there a difference between all of these roles?
No, I mean, you've got to put a lot of that down to IMDb, because they never ask what you did. They put down what they think you did. I've tried to correct them on numerous occasions. There are films on there that I never even worked on. Not many, but one or two. And I've emailed them, I've rung them up, and in the end I just gave up and let them get on with it. But, you know, I was fortunate in that because I started so young with my father, I've been supervising effects on film since I was 21. So I started very early in terms of supervision. You know, when I was 16, I was on location in Malaya doing bullet hits round Bill Holden and looking after the set. And I seemed to get away with it. So, you know, it was starting in at the deep end. But I enjoyed it. I worked hard for a long time. I mean, in those early years, I don't think I had a proper holiday for probably 10 years because we were going just from one movie onto the other.
Goodness me. So what's obviously you did the 67 Casino Royale Bond, but then your sort of official Bond life began with Moonraker. So how did that come about? How did you first get involved in that?
Well, we were going to do, I was going to do a Bond with my father some years before that. And I think there was some politics going on at the time. And let's just say it didn't work out. Then on Moonraker, Derek was doing it, looking after all of the miniature stuff back at Pinewood. And they asked me if I'd go on and help sort things out in France and the rest of the shoot. I opted to do all of the shooting in South America and North America, which took a big chunk of pressure off the other guys. So I did that, and then I missed out I think it was The Spy Who Loved Me that followed that one. I'd worked with John Glenn many times over the years. So when Octopussy started up, they asked me if I'd take over and look after all of the effects, the models, miniatures, all of them. Because, on those early Bonds, because we did everything in camera, and we did as little sort of optical stuff as possible, I was down as the visual effects supervisor because I looked after everything. I did all the models, often used to shoot the background plates, and all the live action. So I can remember, some of those films like View to a Kill, I'd spend the day running between the different units at Pinewood. We had an underwater unit, a model unit, first unit, second unit, and I'd just be running around trying to get onto each stage for the next shot, and then back to my model unit up on the back lot. So it was fun stuff. It was very interesting to do, and I like to think on those early movies we got some of the best and more realistic looking footage, pre-CGI, because I think nowadays things can get a little bit too CGI oriented, and it loses a bit of the reality along the way.
Absolutely.
There's things in some of the Bonds of the 80s that I have seen that I did not know were miniatures until I'd seen the making of documentaries on DVDs that explained. And it's only really then that you appreciate just how good the special effects are, because you don't realize that they were even special effects to begin with. That must frustrate you if people don't, if they watch a film and think, well, there weren't any special effects in that.
No, I mean, it frustrates me if it's, say, one of the academies looking at the film and thinking there weren't any effects in it. That's a frustration. But it's mission accomplished if the audience go to it and don't realise their effects. That's been my whole aim through my life, is to try and make things look real, that people just accept it's real. Whether that's chopping somebody's head off or making a plane fly through a hangar,
That in particular, well, that was the thing that there was a little miniature missile at the beginning of Octopussy, which I just assumed was a missile being launched. I didn't realise it was a. Well, do you want to explain how that was done?
Well, that whole sequence on Octopussy, the opening sequence, I think had probably the best cross-section of all the effects that were available at the time, because we had foreground miniatures. The plane and the missile flying into the hangar were the plane and the missile were both miniatures. The hangar door was a miniature, but everything else was real, and it was shot in camera on location at Northolt Airport. The plane flying through the hangar, we mounted a BD jet on top of a pole arm. And on a Jaguar car, we chopped the roof off a Jaguar. I drove the Jag through the hangar at about 75 miles an hour with the plane up on top. One of my guys hidden in the back seat was controlling the plane banking, so that as the plane went past camera, it banked over and the wing hit the pole arm. And then we had the stuntmen closing the doors to a predetermined stop, which left me about 3 inches on each side. And I drove through the narrow gap and we saw the BD jet leave the hangar. Then we picked up the model again, coming out behind a model door. And the other fun one we did was we shot a lot of the BD jet flying with I think it was a third scale model, which we used to fly on Pinewood Back Lot. And then came the problem of how are we going to see the missile chasing the plane. We'd already done the shot of a missile leaving the launcher, which we did with a rocket. So I got a model missile, made it as light as possible in cardboard and balsa wood. We butchered a radio control setup so we could get a radio control signal inside it. We put a magnesium flare in the back so that we could fire the flare by radio. Then we built two little wire yokes on top of the model jet, mounted the model missile on top of it, but we had a nylon line coming out of the front of the missile, going into the back of the BD jet onto a cotton reel spool. So we take off the model, get it up in the air, get the cameras ready. The model would roll over, the missile would fall off. It would then pull the nylon out of the back of the jet until it was the right distance behind it. I think it was about 20 feet. And then once we got it in position for the camera, we'd fire the magnesium flare on the back of the missile. And we had about 20 seconds, I suppose, that we could shoot footage of it twisting and looping, and everywhere the BD jet went, of course, the missile had to follow. So that's how we did it. And that was sort of invention on the day. How are we going to do this? Oh, let's do it with a bit of string and chewing gum, if you like.
Wow.
That's
awesome.
incredible. Those kinds of stories when you're kind of just improvising, like you say, on the day and just coming up with a solution there and then. Like that's always going to be more. It's going to look better, but it's always going to be more exciting to see something like that pulled off on screen than something cooked up on a computer like they do these days. You know, like that's just amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not to say a lot of what we did was carefully planned. You know, when we did the Airship stuff on A View to a Kill, we had 3 different sizes of model. We had a very small one, which was only about 4 feet long. Then we had one that was 10 feet long. Then we had one that was 40 feet long, which was inflatable. But to do some of the shots, my main concern was losing the wires. So we had the inflatable made, but we had to put curtains inside it like a real airship so that we could blow it up and then get inside and lace the curtains together to make the airship hold its shape. And then for the shots where we were seeing more underneath the airship, we would fill it full of helium when we were underneath it, we'd fill it full of air and hang it from a crane above and swing it about and move it like that. When we were looking more underneath it, we'd fill it full of helium. When we were looking more over the top of it, confusing myself here, we'd tether it from underneath and fill it full of helium.
Got it. Which again led to an interesting moment because I had to adjust the curtains inside depending on which way it was pulling. So if it was helium, it was pulling more from the bottom and vice versa. And to do that, there was a tube of the airship material, which was vinyl. It was only about 18 inches diameter and it was about 10 feet long. We had to crawl through the tube to get into the airship once it was inflated. But of course, when it was full of helium, you couldn't breathe. So I took a demand valve with a long feed hose from an aqualung and went inside and did the work breathing through the demand valve. Unfortunately, I forgot to close my nose.
So halfway through, I just suddenly discovered I was starting to pass out. So it was a very quick exit down the tube to get out and breathe air again. But it was one of those things that you figure out as you go along, and we did it, and it all worked, pretty well.
You'd never know that any of that airship was a model, as far as I was concerned. It all looked like it was just one big, genuine airship. And you also worked, going back to models, on Moonraker. There was the Waterfall. Now, that was a model as well, wasn't it?
It was, but Derek did that. The reason being, when I went on the picture, they'd already decided that they were going to launch a Bond's boat off the top of the Iguazu waterfalls. Brilliant idea, except nobody had really looked at the rocks on top of the waterfall. It was a huge waterfall with, untold amount of water going over it. It was like Victoria Falls, and it was very, very wide. And I went out there with Ernie Day, the second unit director, and we looked at it, and I said, well, personally, I don't think we'll get the boat over. We can get it out into the middle to launch it, but I think it's going to hit a rock somewhere along the line, which will stop it going straight over like you want it. But, if we're committed to it, the boats have already been shipped out there, we'll have a go. So Johnny Morris, one of my key guys, and I waded out across the top of the waterfalls to within about 100 feet of the edge of the fall. We roped ourselves together, and then we would go from rock to rock, sort of belaying one another with a rope in case we got swept away, which we did fairly regularly, pulling the boat out behind us. So one of us would get onto a rock, pull the boat over, the other one would come over, then the next one would go off to the next rock. Anyway, we got the boat out to the middle of the falls, turned it round, aimed it, got the cameras ready, pulled the release, let the boat go. It went all the way down to the edge of the falls and stuck on a rock. And when I say the edge, it was on the edge. Part of the boat was actually over the edge, but it wasn't moving. So we retired back to the hotel, where somebody pointed out, we can't do any more filming because the boat's in the way. It's got to be clear for all the rest of the shooting. And then they all looked at me and said, how are you going to get rid of it? After some discussion, I thought, well, the only way is to lower me down from a helicopter onto the boat, and I'll see if I can find something to stand on and shift it. But I'll be tethered to the helicopter all the time. The helicopter winch couldn't take strain, so we tied a rope onto the cargo lifting point and onto a harness that I got with me. And then we flew out over the top, lowered me down from the winch until I was hanging on the rope. And they dropped me in the water, they dropped me in the bushes, it was all fun, interesting. And then finally I got on a rope, but I couldn't shift the boat. So we flew back to the airport, spoke to the pilot, and then we flew back out and they lowered me down so that I could get hold of the front of the boat. There was a rail round the front of it. And then using me as a link, the helicopter was pulling back and away over the edge of the falls, trying to drag the boat the last. I mean, it only had to move 2 feet and it was going over.
Yeah.
So the helicopter's up there straining hard. My arms are getting longer and longer. And suddenly all I could hear was a strange sort of ping, ping, ping noise, which puzzled me at first because I couldn't figure out what it was or where it was coming from. And then I realised it was the stitching in my harness breaking. So I had to make a fairly quick decision, like, how many stitches have gone? Is it better to stay with the boat or let go and go with the helicopter? I say it had to be a quick decision. I let go and went with the helicopter. And then, of course, I spun round and round, and the rope and the winch cable got all tangled up. So the pilot had to hover there for about 10 minutes while Johnny, my guy, who was controlling the winch in the helicopter, was trying to winch me up. And finally, I just got hold of the skid of the helicopter. I was still hanging underneath. John turned around to give the pilot thumbs up that I'd got that far. Unfortunately, the pilot thought he meant I was in the helicopter. So with that, he did a flying dive over the edge of the falls, down to the river at the bottom and up the river, with me hanging on the skid underneath. It was a good experience. I would like to do it again.
That's outrageous. But none of that sounds like you should have been doing that anyway. Surely that was someone else's job to be doing that. You're just designing the special effects. Well, you're not a stuntman.
I mean, in those days, we did it all, and there wasn't any. We were out in the middle of the jungle. There's nobody else to call on. And I've always said I'm never going to ask somebody to do something if I won't do it myself.
Right.
Because, it's risky, obviously, to a degree, although I figured I knew what I was doing. So, I would have been very uncomfortable saying to one of my guys, I'm going to hang onto that helicopter.
Yeah.
If I wouldn't do it myself, so I did it.
That
but I was younger and sillier then as well.
There you are trying to make a scene happen in a Bond film, and by the sounds of it, what was happening behind the scenes there was probably as exciting, maybe even more exciting than what was. That's amazing.
Well, it made life interesting. It's certainly it's been a good ride along the way,
to say the least. So when The Living Daylights came along, there's loads of model work in that. Like something that springs to mind is the Afghanistan sequence with the bridge and all that kind of stuff. Is there any kind of anything in particular you're proud of from The Living Daylights?
Well, I've always enjoyed the foreground miniatures that we did on the Bonds. And there was a very good one in that where the Hercules plane is flying over a bridge over a big ravine, being chased by horsemen and tanks and explosions. Unfortunately, the location that they found in Morocco, down in Ouarzazate, the bridge was only 10 feet off the riverbed. And of course, that's not spectacular enough for Bond. So I came up with the idea of doing a foreground miniature where we built the ravine and the riverbed and the river. The river, incidentally, was cling wrap on painted plywood. And we built the sides of the ravine and the bottom of the bridge, and then lined that up about 600 yards away, I think it was, quite a distance back from the real bridge. But we lined the top of the model up perfectly with the handrail on the bridge. So you could see in real time horsemen galloping across it, tanks, planes, explosions. and all the time it looked as though it was over a deep ravine. And again, it's one of those invisible shots that hopefully nobody ever spots and just accepts that it's there for real.
That is my favourite of all the Bonds, and I must have seen that countless times when I was a kid, and I never knew that. And that was one of those things, I never knew that was a model until it came to the DVDs. And it doesn't spoil it for me. It just makes me think, oh my God, even now I know that it's not real, it still looks real.
Well, to me, I mean, that's what I was trying to get over in the book, which is why it's called Magic of the Movies, because that was magic. You know, it's smoke and mirrors. But that's one of the sad things I feel today about the film industry, is that kids go to the cinema, and unless they're very young, they know how everything's done. I mean, they can have their own computer at home and generate half of these effects themselves with programs. So I think movies must have lost a lot of the thrill and excitement, because, you know, you're not looking at something real.
Yeah.
Yeah, now those a lot of the models that you made for say Moonraker onwards, they were available to see at a convention that they did in Pinewood in 1990. I don't know if you were asked to be involved in that, but there was an awful lot of these models, the 747 and a lot of the Moonraker shuttles were all there. So does that mean these things all still exist? Are they all still?
A lot of them are. Bonds have got a warehouse where they keep a lot of the stuff. I mean, there's still airships, and I must confess I bought one of the Hercules that was left from Living Daylights, and I bought it from Ian and blew it up on another film. It saved a lot of time and money building another model, and we had to have a C-130 instead of a Hercules, which has got 2 engines instead of 4. So we took 2 of the engines off and trimmed it up and tarted it up a bit, and it worked fine for the other film.
Was that Iron Eagle 3?
Yes, it was.
I saw Iron Eagle 3 yesterday for the very first time.
It wasn't the greatest of movies, but there was some good stuff in it. We did some great explosions and did some good model stuff.
I really enjoyed it. It hasn't got a great reputation, but I'm telling now Bond fans to go out and watch it because it is good fun.
Yeah, it's certainly fun, and I mean we had a real Spitfire. We had I think it was a Harvard going up to be a Japanese Zero. We had an ME-109 and a P-38. And I even went up and did some of the air-to-air stuff for John Glenn, trying to get some of the movements right in the plane, and shot all the models, and we had models of all of the different aircraft and people, dummies hanging underneath, and I had a great team who I'd worked with, Tad Shanovsky, who'd been with me on since Octopussy, and an American guy called Bob Wilcox, who's brilliant. And I first met Bob on Raise the Titanic, another not so wonderful film, but it had a good racing sequence in it and some good underwater stuff. I mean, it all came together on that. And, it was working with John Glenn again, who I've done a lot of movies with. We did have fun together, and we worked well together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you worked on License to Kill as well, which had a pretty troublesome production just because you were suddenly moved to another part of the world.
Yeah.
I should imagine there was quite a few problems working in Mexico, wasn't it?
We were working in Mexico, which is always a bit challenging. I mean, Mexico City's quite high up, so it's a bit hard on the lungs, as I found out when I joined the boys to play football there one day. But a few of us suffered with Montezuma's Revenge and various things. In fact, I met my wife because we both got amoebic parasites together.
How romantic.
Yeah, very romantic. But, 30 plus years later, we're still together, so must have been good parasites somewhere.
Was she working on the film too?
She was working in publicity originally. And then she, later on, she left publicity, and then she came to work for me. And she worked for me on a great number of the Bond movies. She often, I can't remember which ones were which now, on The World Is Not Enough and Tomorrow Never Dies. We went out to Rosarito, which was the tank they used for Titanic, to film all the boat models.
Of course.
And Rosie looked after the production office. She looked after the flights, the crew. She did the continuity for me. She was head cook and bottle washer. And then we carried on that sort of working relationship for another 20 years. So people could never understand how we could work all day together and go home together at night, but it seemed to work pretty well. I didn't get told off too often.
Once you've shared amoebic parasites, there's nowhere the relationship can't go, really, is there?
Now, the next question I have to apologise for, John, it's nothing to do with me, right? I emailed Gareth Owen and I said, Gareth, any questions you think I should ask John? Any particularly good stories that I should get out of him? Blah blah blah. And he sent back one response, which was, "Get him to tell you about the time he caught crabs." So, is that one for a family show or not?
This sounds intriguing.
It's a difficult one to tell.
We can edit it out.
On Moonraker, we were in Florida, Port St. Lucie. We were filming, staying in a hotel in Jupiter, and a very, very old friend of mine, who's sadly no longer with us, but Mike Turk, who's a boatman extraordinaire, and he also had the dubious distinction of being my best man twice.
Wow.
His crew and my crew used to play a lot of practical jokes on one another, and practical jokes were always the sort of order of the day, because you get away on these foreign locations and there's not much to do in the evenings, and everybody gets a bit bored and they get in the bar and have a few drinks, and it's what can we do to amuse ourselves tonight? So one particular morning I woke up and found these little tiny things crawling on my parts, and I was a little worried, and I asked the guys on location, the ADs, if we got a doctor at hand. So they shunted me round to see the doctor, and I caught one of these things in a film can, and I walked in and said to the American nurse, she said, "Morning, honey, what's the problem?" And I said, "I've got a bad eye. Mainly to get in and see the doctor." And then when I saw the doctor, we went through the eye thing, and then I showed him this thing, and he said, "Do you itch?" And I said, "Well, I certainly do since I found it." And he said, "Well, I wouldn't worry too much. If you really, really start to itch a lot, then come back and see me." So I went back to the set and felt very uncomfortable and very scratchy. So I rang up the production secretary. She got a doctor in to the hotel that night. He came in, same routine, showed him the film can, and he looked at it and he said, He said, "I ain't seen one of these since Nam," meaning Vietnam. So he gave me a shampoo to put on, you put it on in the shower and you stand there like an idiot covered in foam for 20 minutes and it cures you. Anyway, cut to 3 months later, I was round at Mike Turk's back in this country having dinner, and we were talking about practical jokes, and he started to laugh and he said, "Boy, did the boys get a good one on you." And he wouldn't tell me what it was. And I said, "Was it anything to do with crabs?" And with that, Mike's lying on his back on the floor, kicking his legs in, laughing. And it turns out some of his guys had caught these tiny, tiny baby crabs on the dock where we had the boats moored. They'd broken into my hotel room that night, sprinkled them in the bed. And of course, I woke up in the morning and they're all over me. So
Good
that
God.
was the crab story.
Please tell me you got them back in the end for that.
Oh, yes. Rest assured.
Do you want to tell that story, or is it not safe for public consumption?
I won't go any further into it than that.
Famously, Roger Moore was a big practical joker. So were there any that you played on him, or any that you were involved with?
Yeah, there were jokes going on all the time. When we were doing Octopussy, we were filming in a jungle set on the stage at Pinewood, and Roger had to run into the bushes and peer out looking for the tiger that was chasing him. And I knew there was a gorilla suit in the prop room, so I went over and borrowed it and put it on. Had a word with the AD and told him what I was going to do, and told John. So Rogers dived in the bushes, and he thinks he's in there on his own, but unknown to him, I'm there as well. And I just tapped him on the shoulder with a full gorilla suit on. His comment I can't repeat, but it was silly, fun things like that, which went on quite a lot.
Beautiful stuff. Another question came in from Gareth, which was, ask him how Keith Hampshire ended up in a laundry basket in the hotel manager's bedroom.
Oh, told this story only yesterday. We were on a film called Young Winston in Marrakesh. So I'm going back about 40 years. And there was nothing to do. There's no televisions. There was only the bar, and you get back at night, and boys will be boys. And we discovered going back to the hotel, great big long corridors, and they used to leave laundry hampers about all over the place. And one particular night, we managed to get Keith Hampshire, who was the stills man, into one of the hampers to do races up and down the corridor. And then we thought it would be great fun because we knew one of the young lady secretaries on the film. We knew her room number. So we raced up the corridor, quite late at night, pushed the door open, shoved the hamper in, shut the door, and ran away giggling like schoolchildren. what we didn't know was the said lady was having an affair with the hotel manager, and they were both in there. So if you picture the scene, the lights are off. Keith doesn't know where he is because he didn't know we were going to do it. The lights go on. There's a couple in bed. Keith opens the lid of the hamper very slowly, peering out, and then has to apologise and back himself out gracefully from the room.
Wow.
We wound Keith up the next day, telling him that Carl Foreman had found out, and Carl was the producer, and Carl was really cross. And so we wound it up all day on the location. That night, Keith rushed back early to the hotel, walked into Carl's office and apologised. And of course, Carl didn't know anything about it until he apologised.
Fantastic.
Silly things.
I should imagine the last person that lady wanted to see while she was in that particular predicament was the set photographer peeping out from a basket at the bottom of her bed.
I don't think she wanted to see anybody, not alone the photographer.
I've read that you worked on all the Harry Potter films, is that right?
Yeah, all 8.
I mean, that in itself is a heck of an achievement. And you were working on a Bond at the same time?
I did Die Another Day, which overlapped heavily with what was it? The Chamber of Secrets.
Second one.
Film.
Yeah.
Die Another Day, I have to say, was not my favourite Bond by any stretch of the imagination. I think it was the first Bond that went heavily into CGI, and it didn't work, as you've probably noticed. Invisible cars and waves with Bond surfing across the lake. It just didn't, for me, it didn't work. Plus, because of the way it was written, I suppose, a lot of the model aircraft stuff had to be done in a more visual effects green screen way, and that I was very uncomfortable with, and I don't think let's just say it wasn't my proudest Bond moment.
If you had to make, sorry, Tom, if you had to, would you get to look at the script and say, no, we just can't do that, let's not bother?
Well, back in the days with John Glenn and Michael Apted, we would, we'd sit down with Cubby and the producers, Michael and Barbara, and we'd say, well, we can do that, but if we're going to make it look good, it's going to cost $1 million for one shot. But if we do this instead, and it was a lot more, I felt, collaborative back then, and we'd work our way through the ideas to get, something that John or Michael wanted that was dynamic and spectacular enough. We get something that we could do for the budget that we got, which kept the producers happy. And sometimes by altering things, you can actually achieve a better moment on film. I mean, a classic example, it wasn't a Bond, but on a film called The Omen. We had to take David Warner's head off with a sheet of glass. And it was written in the script that the glass was being lifted by a crane over a building site, and it slipped out of its tethers and floated down and into the building yard and straight through David Warner. The problem was we didn't have the budget on the film to film it in Jerusalem, which is where it was set. And if you're going to be looking up at a crane, you need the Jerusalem skyline and, minarets and whatever else is there, not Shepperton Back Lot. So I came up with the idea of putting the glass flat on the back of a lorry and talked to Dick Donner and Harvey, the producer, and said, why don't we have the glass flat on the back of a lorry? The driver gets out, the handbrake pops off, the truck rolls backwards, hits a pile of bricks or sand or something, truck stops dead, and the glass shoots off and wallop. And that's what we did. And it got, a very good cinematic moment. I mean, that decapitation, I think, is, pretty well up there. Certainly, Harvey and Dick were happy because it looked great, but B, it was shootable on Shepperton Back Lot. And that's the sort of collaboration that I've always, or more often than not, enjoyed on movies, and that's the fun way to work. I mean, what's sad for me now is talking to a lot of the guys that have worked for me over the years, who are now supervisors in their own right. I know a number of them who have said, well, the director wants to talk to them through his people rather than directly. And that's not collaborative filmmaking to my way of thinking. And that's sad. And I don't know where that crept in from, but it was certainly in my younger days not what I got used to doing.
I guess it's just because the film crews are so huge now.
Well, it's not that. I mean, directors have time to discuss every scene with every HOD that they've got that is involved in any particular scene. And if they're so grand that they can't find the time to do that, then I'm sorry, but it's not somebody I'd like to work with. Not that I will anymore, but
I always I remember there's a scene in For Your Eyes Only. We had John Glenn on the show a couple of years back now, and he told us about the scene in For Your Eyes Only where Carol Bouquet had a sinus infection and she couldn't go underwater, and they had to have this underwater scene. And basically they shot it in slow motion and then put some fans on her so her hair would go up in the air like that and look like it was underwater. And then they managed to get the bubbles to come out of their mouth by, I think that was something to do with a fish tank or something. And then they would stitch the bubbles over the it's just so genius. And when you see that film, there is no way you would ever detect that wasn't an underwater scene. It just like that level of thinking and problem solving is amazing. And like you say, when you compare it to just cooking something up on a computer, that makes your job boring, but B, it's just not the same, is it? It just doesn't have the same. It's easy compared to
I remember Derek Meddings doing, I think it was one shot on Moonraker, and they had to do a little missile taking off with a trail behind it, and it was with the wonderful Paul Wilson, who was one of the great cameramen and model cameramen of our time, and they did it by filling the missile with table salt, and as they pulled it up, the salt fell out in the stream at the back, and it looked like smoke coming out the back. Shoot it at the right speed, and that's what one of the arts of filming with models is getting the right scale and the right camera speed to slow things down and to the right weight and size and give it the right sort of dynamic look. And that's why I used to love shooting models, because it was just fun working all these things out and going into work every day and doing it.
Wow, yeah. So you mentioned CGI changing the way these films are made. You've looking at the films in your career, there is a distinctive around the late 80s. That's when it starts to sort of creep in, and you see films like Willow, which had computer controlled animation, and then a little later on, you've got films like Starship Troopers, which has got things that probably 10 years earlier would have been done by stop motion, but they're all CG. And yet you're still there, you're still working on them. So does that mean that there's always going to be some space for practical effects in every film?
Well, I don't know. We often talk about effects coming back in more. I think, back in the Starship Troopers days, I mean, that was nearly 20 years ago now. CGI hadn't really come on that fully, and we did quite a lot with live action creatures and things. So we would get the benefit of the best of all of our talents, and instead of just saying, "Oh, we'll CGI everything," or "We'll fix it in post," that wonderful phrase. What we would do is sit down and how much can we do for real? How much is impossible to do? And we would sort of divide it up between us, and we come up with a pretty good collaboration, I suppose, again, of all our different genres, and putting that together. That is what makes it work. One of my pet bugs has been long that instead of, we always used to work with storyboards, which were great, and they were simple and easy, and it left you a bit of wiggle space moving from storyboard to storyboard. Now it's more common to have a previs, which is, for all intents and purposes, a cartoon of what you're going to end up with. And sometimes what you end up with looks like a cartoon as well these days. But the previs is nearly always done by a computer guy in an office who's not spent too much time on a film set, doesn't really know too much about how you can do things practically and the tricks that you can do. So the director will work with the previs guy who comes up with all these great looking ideas, but it's very divorced from reality in a lot of cases. And I did a movie years ago called North Sea Hijack, and it was all about oil rigs in the North Sea. Mm-hmm. There's not one real shot of an oil rig in the film. They're all miniatures. We did it all on Pinewood backlot, really straining scale of water and things on that. Right on the edge a lot of the time. And the first shot I did on the picture was the opening shot of the big oil rig, Jennifer, I think it was. And we got this huge oil rig model, and I got one of the boys to build me a little 3-inch high figure that we put on a little brass track, and he had rubber legs. So we put a ladder on his shoulder and a bucket in his hand, and we moved him along the track. And on the track, every piece, there was a little brass raised piece, so that as he moved along, his feet caught on the brass piece and made his legs look as though he was walking.
Wow.
And I put the camera on a floating platform in the tank, so that with the wave movement, the camera was floating as well. And we started off zoomed in on the name with this little figure walking along, and immediately the audience glimpse somebody walking along. They think it's real. And if you zoom out quick enough, you don't get to really study the figure. You've just seen enough of it to know that it's a man walking. And the shot looked great, I thought. Andy McLaglen, who was the director, went and saw it. And he came down and saw me, and he said, that shot, that opening shot, he said, the shot's great. He said, but the camera's moving. I said, yeah. He said, well, it should be a static shot because it's an audience point of view. I said, well, why should it be static? He said, well, it's an audience point of view, it should be static. And I said, well, if you were out there shooting the real oil rig, where would you be? Standing on a rock or on a boat? He said, well, no, you'd be on a boat, wouldn't you? I said, right. What would a boat be doing? He said, well, be moving. So I said, well, that's the point. You want the audience to think you're actually shooting it for real. So if you put yourself where you would be with the camera to film it for real, then you immediately made the audience think that you're shooting something real.
Yeah.
And you look at a lot of these movies today that have air battles or planes flying. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Second World War or whatever. And you'll see a shot where the plane is flying towards the camera and it goes straight through the lens. Now, as soon as you've done that, you've completely blown all credibility, because everybody knows it can't happen. You've killed the pilot, killed the cameraman. It doesn't work. And if only directors and previous guys would study that side of it more, I think you'd start to get a lot more reality back in movies. And it was the same on Harry Potter. A lot of what we did on the first 3 films with Chris Columbus and Alfonso Cuarón and Mike Newell, we tried to do as much for real as we could. And I think that really helped the magic look like it was real magic. And I think in the latter films, they tended to get away from that more, which for me, I wasn't as happy with those as I was with the earlier ones.
I can imagine. So you've got a lot of Oscar nominations over the years for various things, but you obviously won for Aliens. So what tell me a little bit about that. Is that a film you're particularly proud of? If you were going to win a film for the Oscar, is that the right one, do you think, or what?
It was certainly the right one for the first one. I saw Aliens again the year before last. I had a screening at the Albert Hall with the Philharmonic Orchestra playing the music live. And Sigourney came over, and Jim Cameron, Pete Lamont came up there. And we had a bit of a reunion and watched the movie. The amazing thing was, we made that film 25 years ago, something like that. And it looks as good today as anything else out there. Everybody's work. And I think that is a film to be proud of. And, I was fortunate that was my first nomination, because the other 5, which didn't win, it wasn't quite so upsetting, because I'd already got one,
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you keep the Oscar? Does it have pride of place displayed?
On the bookshelf in the living room.
Very nice, cool stuff.
It's not propping over the toilet door.
Over the years, has there been any films you've watched and there's been some sort of visual effect, and to this day you can't work out how it was done?
No, I think there've been 1 or 2 where I've had to sit and think long and hard about it, or I wasn't quite sure if it was, a big model or a live action or whatever. More often than not, you can see. I always say to people, if it's a good movie, I'll watch it and I'll enjoy the movie. If it's a bad movie, I'll sit and pick all those bits to pieces. But
yeah. Are you officially retired? Are you still working on movies?
Semi-retired. Because I did all the Potter stuff, I still look after all the things that we built for Potter and put into the studio tour at Leavesden. And we refresh that all the time and, put new things in.
Okay.
But, it was a good, interesting learning curve, because, obviously everything we build on a movie has got to last for 3 weeks, and then we throw it in a skip. And all of a sudden it's running 24/7 for 7 years non-stop. So we've had to re-engineer the mechanics of a lot of the original pieces just to keep them going.
That has to be practical. There's no way you can just do that with CGI. So there's definitely a benefit there to your artistry.
Yeah, well, it's all there to see. That's one of the great things about that tour, is that people can see how we do things, how we did things. And, they can see behind the set. But, it works on several levels, because the kids love it. The mums and dads love it because they can see the mechanics and what goes into it. We still get 6,000 people a day down there on a busy day, so it works.
Wow. Is that in Leavesden?
Yeah, Watford.
Right. Yeah, which was built by Eon, I believe.
Well, it was the old Rolls-Royce factory, which before that was where they built the Mosquito aircraft during the war.
Right.
Actually, Stanley Kubrick looked at it first, but didn't take it when they were going to do Full Metal Jacket. Then Eon went in there for Casino, and then they did a Star Wars there and Sleepy Hollow. And then we went in on Harry Potter 1. And 10 years later, when we finished all the Harry Potters, they built it as a proper studio. And it's thriving now.
That's fantastic. It's so cool that Eon helped keep everything floating, because there was a pretty lean period in the 80s, in the late 80s, wasn't there, where there wasn't an awful lot going on.
Well, there've been lots of lean periods in my time. We used to say it was a 7-year slump. Back in the 60s, I can remember it was so quiet. They padlocked a lot of the stages at Pinewood and got the council in, so they didn't have to pay rates on them. Thank you.
Wow. That's awful.
But it used to happen pretty regularly, which is why I moved out to Los Angeles. I moved out there we moved out there in the 1990s, early 90s, which is probably why I didn't see the model thing at Hollywood or whatever it was, because I was living in the States working out there. And we lived out there for 14 years and then came back when came back to do a little film called Harry Potter.
Right. Tiny little home movie.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book then, Making Movie Magic. I hear it's winning for a second run at the printers, so it's proven popular. What we're going to tell everybody, of course, who listens to this show to go and get a copy. But what can we expect in the book? What are we going to learn?
What I tried to do in the book was mix it up a little bit. I didn't want it to be another I book. You know, I met this great person and that great person, and you know, sort of name dropping all the time. Yes, I did meet people, and I do mention it, but I wanted it to reflect how things have changed from my father's time, because there's a lot of pictures of the films he was doing back in the 1930s, and the models that he used to do. And then sort of into how I got into the film industry, and the movies that I, you know, did in those early years. But then I wanted to put over some of the funny stories that we've been talking about, and some of the jokes and silly things that happen, and also then show a little bit of, you know, behind the scenes where I could of how we did things and how we did the foreground miniatures, and you know, a sort of combination of photographs of, or, you know, a sort of before and after, if you like, of what it looks like through the camera and what it looks like if you look around the side. So, you know, hopefully people will find it interesting, funny, and you know, there's a few tales of different movies, and there's a lot of Bond, because Bond was, you know, a big part of my career, and probably the most fun part too.
Oh, that's good to hear.
That's nice to hear.
Absolutely. So over the years then, is there one film that you think you're particularly proud of, but wasn't one of the big ones? Maybe it didn't get as much attention as you thought it perhaps should. Is there anything we should go and watch, like an undiscovered gem?
There's a million films, there's a lot of films I've worked on over the years that are special for one reason or another, but they're all for different reasons. You know, it might be the director I was working with, or some of the things that we did were, you know, I did a picture called Lucky Lady, which, you know, wasn't a great movie, sadly. It was a great script. Stanley Donen directing, who was a wonderful director. Burt Reynolds, Liza Minnelli, Gene Hackman. We filmed it out in Mexico. I was only 27, big Hollywood movie. It was really difficult because we were at sea nearly every day for 6 months, and trying to control boats and explosions and effects gags is difficult enough on dry land, but sometimes when the boats are floating all in different directions and you can't get them all in the right place at the right time, you've got to be so careful. And that was a challenging film for that reason. The Straw Dogs with Sam Peckinpah was a very hard film to do. Sam was an interesting director to work with, and just, you know, sort of getting through that. And I did, The Straw Dogs and the Devils with Ken Russell back to back, and I always feel if I can get through those two, I can do anything.
It sounds like a fun summer.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting year or two, that was. I say, each and every Bond has been magical. I mean, when you're on movies with, Bond girls drifting in and out, and 1 minute you're in the Bahamas and the next minute you're in California or wherever, what's not to like,
Absolutely, big time. So what's next for John Richardson then? Have we got any more books in the pipeline? Any other plans we should know about?
No more books. I think I've flogged myself to death with this one. I would have liked to get a few more colour pictures into it. The pictures are black and white. I'd hoped for colour, but that wasn't to be. I'm very proud of the book. I'm very pleased with the way it turned out. History Press did a great job. Gareth was a wonderful help to put it all together. Mm-hmm. I'm continuing, down at Leavesden and Warner Brothers as long as they want me. I still look after the water tanks down there because we built, state-of-the-art deep water diving filming tank for the 4th Harry Potter film. And as I designed most of it and the filtration, purification and everything, I still look after that for them. So it's enough to keep the grey cells going. And other than that, drift off to Italy whenever I can and drink red wine.
Very nice. That's the life.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
I hope this doesn't sound like a facetious question, do you still blow things up for a laugh?
Not anymore. It's so difficult now in this time of health and safety.
Everybody needs to know. It's done in your back garden.
I used to do great firework displays come November the 5th, which used to rattle everybody's windows. And that was always fun. It's I don't know. I've got dogs now who hate fireworks, so I'm much more aware of the canine community when November the 5th comes around.
But your big explosions have been caught on film for everyone to see, and that's the important thing. If that's what you're into, you've captured some doozies on celluloid. Well,
there was one on Starship Troopers that I think was probably one of the biggest ever done. And it was a fireball that raced for more than half a mile up a canyon, filling the canyon. And it was about 2,000 gallons of fuel and probably can't remember off the top of my head how much dynamite, but there was a lot of it. And this fireball travelled, I say, up the canyon at 300 miles an hour and stopped 12 inches in front of the lens of one of the main cameras, which was pretty well judged, I thought.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot like that have been fun to do, and it's always nice when everybody recoils from the heat, but nobody gets burnt.
You compare that to someone pushing buttons in a room somewhere to create the same effect nowadays, and you tell them that you were dangling from a helicopter over a waterfall to free a speedboat, that they wouldn't believe you.
No, but health and safety wouldn't let me now either. So, I was very privileged and lucky to live through the era of filmmaking that I did, because I think it was the best, the best that there's been. And I think you'll find a lot of old technicians out there that say the same thing.
Truer words have never been said. Absolutely. Those were the days. Those were the days, for sure. Well, John, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate, or we really appreciate your time. You've dropped some amazing stories on us. We're super grateful for your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm glad you can. Let's go and have a glass of red wine now.
Good idea.
Take care.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
So, Dan Gale, what did you make of that, mate?
Well, he's a legend. He is an absolute legend. And it's so good that he's still got all those stories. It's so good that he's put them all down on paper. So I'm really looking forward to getting this book. I think it's going to be one that you keep going back to again and again. As I said, his artistry is like an editor, or like someone whose job it is you're not even supposed to notice. They often go unnoticed, because if they're doing their job properly, you don't see the joins, you don't see the great stuff that they've done. Because if it looks like a special effect, then they've gone wrong. So it is such a shame that most of his stuff will go unnoticed, because most people don't realise that was actually a model.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think that, like we've often said before, it's like when you get somebody like Roger Moore on a podcast, it's like, what do you ask that dude that he hasn't already spoken about in an interview in the past, and on all the rest of it that nobody's heard a million times already? And some of these dudes who are kind of like behind the scenes in the trenches, like solving problems. I mean, like that Octopussy jet story, the Acrostar jet story was amazing. You know, there he is in a I think he said it was in a Jag, wasn't it? Driving along through the hangar, and how they'd set the whole thing up and gotten the rocket to follow him. Like that stuff is amazing, isn't it?
And the fact that it wasn't done that long ago, really. It was in my lifetime, at least. So it's astonishing to think that at some point it would be the person who was in charge of the special effects who would be literally risking life and limb, dangling from a helicopter to nudge something that's gone wrong, or because nowadays it wouldn't be done like that. There would be a whole crew of people that would be doing all that stuff for you. Yeah, if it was being done at all.
That is unimaginable in today's world, isn't it? Like that hanging off the bottom of a helicopter, and that is almost like for your eyes only, isn't it? Like when the chopper pilot took off and he's hanging onto the skids. I mean, that is a scene from Bond, and that was just, Tuesday on the set. Isn't that crazy?
It's amazing.
It's bananas, isn't
it? It would have been, as much as I think you and I both would have liked to have been involved in those films, or done something in the background. Yeah. To have watched your colleagues have to do that sort of thing, it would be. It'd be too nerve-wracking. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, I know. Good old Chris Wright, he'd be well up for that. He'd be enjoying every minute. Me, I'll stay firmly on dry ground. I'm not going anywhere near the edge of that waterfall. Thanks very much. But yeah, I think they were built of different stuff, those fellas. And I've said it before, when it comes to the these legends who've worked on Bond over the years, they're all so down to earth, aren't they? They're all so normal. There's no airs and graces. There's no nose in the air movie industry bollocks, for want of a better word. They're all sort of down to earth, great people, aren't they?
Yeah, we can only aspire to be like them.
Yeah, absolutely. Righty ho then. I think that about wraps up today's episode of James Bond Radio. It's been a good one. Good old John. Make sure everybody listening or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, goes out and gets a copy of Making Movie Magic, John's book. Like I say, it's already doing its second round at the printers, so it's proving very popular. So make sure get out to the shop today, see if you can snap up a first edition before they're all gone. Good stuff. All right then. Until next time, I've been Tom Sears.
I've been Dan Gale, but don't tell anyone.
And James Bond Radio will return. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Good night.